Derech Briyosa Shel Odom, the way God created man, there was Nibshach b'Deosov u'b'Masov, Achareov v'Chaveirov, that the human being should be drawn in his perspective, in his behavior, after his peers and his inner circle of friends. Noe comedic anshimidinoso, and he conducts himself as the members of his community. That's why God created a human being, to be influenced and drawn after his peer group, perspective-wise, behavior-wise, and in every aspect of it. His peer group and his friends. You know, in the olden days, there was an expression among Jews was called Landsman, landsman. People came from Europe who would meet somebody from same town, although they were Warsaw, and Warsaw pre-World War II, there were 2.5 million Jews. All of a sudden, it's his Landsman, because they're from Warsaw. They never knew they existed. The name was never ever mentioned, but immediately knowing that you come from a similar background, whether it's community or culture-wise, immediately you connect. That is the basis for connection. You're drawn after something similar to yourself. He says, you're drawn after perspective and behavior, Reov. Reov is your peer group, your friends. That if you see a connection with them, it's easy to maintain yourself because you're naturally influenced. Change is not easy. But if you're influenced, that's not called change. The person doesn't even realize that the change is taking place. And since God created a human being that he is drawn after his, in perspective, action, behavior, after his people he identifies with, as a result of that, you have to be careful who you identify with. Who are your friends? Who are your peer group? Because since the result of that exposure will impact on your perspective and on your behavior, on your actions, you better choose the right kind of company. If it's the right kind of company, the perspective will be appropriate, the actions will be acceptable, and the behavior will be on par. Since this is a reality, a person, who should you attach yourself to? To the devoutly righteous. Two things. You attach yourself to tzaddikim and sit among the wise, tomid, continuously. Yeah, continuously. You say, sit among the wise most of the time. No. Because if that is truly the ultimate, you don't want to dilute that. But he says, why? They should yilmod mimaseim. Because you want to learn from their actions. You want to be influenced. You want to be drawn after their perspective, after their behavior. But if it's not continuous and you allow yourself to be exposed to others, other types of behavior, since you are impressionable as God created a human being, that will interfere with the impression which the tzaddik and the wise men are making on you. You know, it's interesting. There's such a thing referred to as attention span. As the generations continue, the attention span becomes less and less. If you have a larger attention span, you're able to, due to your focus, you're able to absorb much more. Because you're attentive and the span is longer span. If it's a smaller span, whatever you could get in during that period, the person's able to absorb. But if it's beyond that, you've lost his attention. So let's say you have a situation like this. You're lecturing on a certain subject matter. You're trying to communicate a value. And let's say a person's attention span is 15 minutes. And you say to the person, we'll continue tomorrow regarding this subject matter. From today to tomorrow, you realize there's a big gap. In that interim period, you're going to be exposed to other things, whether it's reading material, whether it's listening to things, or seeing things. Because there's a break in what's being communicated to you, what's being impressed upon you, whatever is in that interim period will actually not allow even what you absorbed to be absorbed fully, because automatically it will not allow it to be a continuum because there's an interruption. Therefore, you should be exposed to Chachomim Tomid, Tzadikim and Chachomim Tomid, continuous, to have the full effect of their influence. Because since a human being is impressed, the Yisrachik min HaRishoyim. So two things. In terms of, you should be exposed continuously to the tzaddik, the devoutly righteous, and the wise person. So you should learn from their ways. Let's say you take a break, but you're not exposed to anybody who's evil. But still, as we're impressed, we speak about evaporation, detachment. If you keep feeding something, funneling something, the particular issue becomes alive and vibrant. The moment you take away the source that provided that vibrancy, it starts drying up. It starts evaporating. So if you want to have the full effect of the tzaddik and the wise man, it should be continuous. A continuous infusion of what that represents. If not, that means you've taken a break. That means you're going to have a little bit of a setback. I'm not saying how much, but you're not going to have the full value of those special people. In addition, he says, Yisrachim min HaRishoyim. Distance yourself from the evil, because what they represent, being impressionable, you'll be impressed by what they represent. Ahochim b'choshech, and what's the degree of context that they live their lives? Equivalent of darkness. Why should you disrupt? You should not learn from their waves. Because again, as a human being, we're always being impressed. You should not learn from their waves. The Gemara tells us that you could learn modesty from a cat. A cat, when it does its physical needs, its function, it goes in a very modest way, and it hides itself. That's its DNA, the way God created the cat. So if you want to learn modesty, look at the behavior of it. If you want to learn zeal and alacrity, look at a worm. Look at an ant. An ant is the most laborious insect, moving continuously, fully labor intensive. That's an ant. If you want to learn zeal and alacrity, the ant. He leaves nothing finished. He's always as busy as ever. But the only way you can learn from the ant, you have to focus on the ant. You have to focus on the cat. When you deal with a human being, you meet a human being, you don't have to focus very much. The person naturally is what you see. And if the behavior is a certain type of negative behavior, although you may not see it as negative, you'll be impressed with that behavior. When you see a tzaddik, although you may not even know what the word tzaddik means, but since his behavior is a representation of good and appropriate and value, you're exposed to something which is a positive environment. Therefore, you'll be what? You'll be affected positively. Give you an example. You live in a location where the environment is very healthy. The air is healthy. The food is not, no chemicals, no carcinogens in the water. That person will naturally be healthy. He doesn't even know what the word health means. The man's illiterate. But if you're in a healthy environment, you're healthy. You're in an environment which is unhealthy, the person doesn't even realize what he's inhaling and what he's being exposed to. The magnetic fields, doesn't realize it. But ultimately, it will compromise his health, his immune system. Just being exposed to that, because you're impressed. A human being is the most impressionable being walking the face of the earth. King Solomon says in Proverbs, "Chanoch nar al pi darko." When you raise a child, a youth, you should raise him based on his strengths and his weaknesses. Al pi darko. Two children are not necessarily the same. Each one has to be mentored, has to have a very specific tailor-made mentoring program. Chanoch nar al pi darko. On its own way. Each person has certain nuances of difference. If the person is that ultimate educator, he could make that evaluation, understand exactly what each person needs, and he tweaks it and creates the program based on that person's needs. That's Chanoch nar pi darko. But you have to appreciate that person to be able to what? To tweak him right, to mold him right. Again, if the environment is right, the child will be impressed. If the environment is wrong, I'll give you an example. Let's say the child doesn't like the teacher. Doesn't like the teacher. First and foremost, we respond, we're drawn or distanced based on what we feel about a person. That's the first thing. It's irrelevant what the person represents, but if he has a caustic personality and he's insulting and he's demeaning, the child doesn't want to be associated with that person. The words that the man or whatever he says, the child doesn't want to hear about it. The student doesn't want to hear about it. That person's not in the position to be an influencer. As much as you're impressed, the human being is impressionable, but this is something we keep deflecting. Subconsciously, we deflect it. We want nothing to do with this person because you see that person in negative light. But if you see a person in a positive light, and the person, it represents something good, that person will have that positive effect on you. And if you see the evil person in a negative light, and you want nothing to do with him, you'll be less affected negatively. But if you see him in a positive light, that evil person, because you say that that's not evil, then you're vulnerable, that you'll be impressed to your core with whatever that person represents. I'll respond to it.
I was going to say that the current secular education system doesn't understand the concept that each child has to be taught in their own way. It's just one size fits all. It doesn't really work, obviously.
Let's talk about not today. Let's go back 50 years ago, 60 years ago. You sit in the class, or you go to college, and the professor delivers a lecture. It's the same lecture. He has 100 students, 50 students. The ones who are listening, they're listening to the same lecture. Each one absorbs it and processes it in his own context. The professor has no relationship with the students whatsoever. Trying to explain to them or understand how they understand the material. That relationship is not there. It's an arm's length relationship. So if that's the case, what you're saying, it's one size fits all. I deliver my lecture, I give you an exam, and whatever mark you get on the exam, that's how you grade it. based on, although the student may understand the material better than the professor, but the professor wants his answer. He doesn't want any creativity. He wants his answer. And if you give his answer, you pass, or you get that superior grade. That's always. If you study in the yeshiva, especially when you reach your mid-teenage years, and there's a teacher, you go to a class, there's preparation for the class, you listen to the class, and then after the class is over, there's review. During preparation, you interact with the Rebbe, preparing the material. During the class, you listen. After the class, you review, and you ask questions to the teacher. And you interact. You interact among yourselves to review the material, and you interact with the teacher. As a result of this, the teacher has an understanding which each student is, to what degree he appreciates or understands the material by the questions he asks, or how he repeats the information or not. There's more of a developmental aspect to the process when you study Talmud or you study Hebrew subject and you're studying something secular. Yeah, history or Hebrew language, it doesn't make a difference. Because many things have to do with character development, personality development, refinement. All this has to do also with the material you absorb with the knowledge you have. Being a more knowledgeable person and you live like a predator, there's nothing to be impressed with. But if you become more knowledgeable, and because of that, you understand the value of the world, the value of other people, and the potential, that means you're becoming a better quality person. You're becoming a more refined person. Because you understand better, you become more giving. You become more responsible. Because you understand the value of what a human being is based on his endowment, which is intelligence and many other things he has. Special people don't grow out of a vacuum. People are special because there's a reason why they're special. Either they had special parents, they had special teachers, they had special mentors, they had a special group of friends, quality people, and it's a combination of many things. Very rarely do you find a person where everything was negative, and despite everything, that person becomes special. That's a rarity. Usually, the end product is an indication of what the background was. The final product. That's what it is. So based on what the Rambam is saying here, that there's no more impressionable person than a human being. When you raise a child, when you want to create an environment, let's say an educational environment, what should that environment contain? Only positive things. Otherwise, if there's anything negative, it'll have a negative impression. Now, many years ago, a person said to me, he used to go during vacation, he traveled to Switzerland when his children were off. And the environment in Switzerland during that season in December, it's not the best environment for young children, for teenagers. Because the people who, although this family was observant, but the people who visit that location, the way they dress, the way their lifestyle, everything is not conducive to spirituality. It's almost living on high on the hog, and behavior-wise, it's not good. So I said to the person, I said, you know something, I think if you be smart, although you can afford that vacation, you should go elsewhere. Because you never know how it could affect your children. The teenagers are very impressionable. You never know. He says, yeah, but if they don't know what the world's all about, and then they're on their own eventually, they'll enter into a state of shock. They have to know how to contend with all these issues. Okay? Look, thank God I was never there. I wasn't exposed to that. I'm fully aware what it is. And so I didn't grow up in a cocoon. I'm still aware. Because if we're saying a person is impressionable, especially a young person, is more impressionable than an older person, so if you expose your child to that environment and the effect is negative, how do you get it out of a system? It's not so simple. Why fix it if it's not broken? You may there, one of these people, he was there, and there was somebody came, very wealthy Arab, and he was driving, I don't know what kind of car, a $350,000 sports car. And the boy was 15 years old. And the parents allowed him to have some level of association with him, not because he was out in the with matter, but it happened to be that's what he was. And Rabbi Pinto, when this person came to Rabbi Pinto, he says, by the way, when you were there, did your son have anything to do with cars? That's the question Rabbi Pinto said. Asked him. He says, I'm not sure. I'll check with my son. And it was this, 350,000 red sports car. Can you imagine? Going down the mountains in Switzerland. It's not. A kid at that age gets excited when he sees this kind of thing. The person revs it up, the building starts shaking. Right?